Alright, so today I'm going to be walking you guys through my build with 4-piece striker on the patch 1.5 PTS for anyone that may not have a PC, plays strictly on console, and just wants more information about the upcoming changes. Hopefully it gives a lot of that information and talks about one of the gear sets that I know a lot of people have already run. It has a soft spot in a lot of people's hearts because they enjoy striker, and it's been out. It's one of the original gear sets in the game. It is actually very powerful now, and I foresee this being a highly competitive set once 1.5 drops. For anyone that doesn't already know, although I'm sure most of you do, the bonuses on Striker are 20% stability for the 2-piece, 10% enemy armor damage for the 3-piece, and then for the 4-piece, the most important part, every consecutive hit deals 1% more damage, stacks up to 100%. Missing shots drops bonus by 2%, and bonus is reduced by 1% every second. This means that it can stack per pellet on shotguns, and I'll be using this with an SASG for the fastest stacking that I know of. It's extremely efficient. The SASG over the Super 90 because of the fact that you can reload with a magazine instead of thumb load individual rounds one at a time. So Striker will be very efficient if you can land the shots, and any player that can capitalize on that will be able to achieve the highest percentage weapon damage bonus in the game from a single source, up to 100%. That's unparalleled by any other mechanism in existence, and it can be used to devastating effect by players that are efficient. I'll talk about all of my gear pieces, why I've rolled what I have rolled. I'll talk about my 2 high ends and why I've chosen them, as well as a couple changes to the high ends. And then I'll talk about my main weapon, my skills, my talents, etc. And then I'll kick it over to some gameplay of me shredding some of the hardest enemies in the game, no problem. Okay, so to start with, we have our backpack. Now, this is a high-rolled firearms backpack with armor. Now, there's still not very many things that you're going to roll instead of armor. You're pretty much going to get that on every single slot as a major attribute on your gear because enemy armor damage doesn't really combat it to a high enough caliber. I'm sure that they're going to change the scaling on enemy armor damage, and in fact, the 3-piece Sentry's bonus here of 10% enemy armor damage is very helpful because now it will translate to PvP, so this build can be used quite effectively against other players. But I don't really know exactly how it's going to work. I'm sure that the formula is going to be tweaked. So all I can tell you is that in some capacity or another, enemy armor damage will be a thing. I just don't know how it's going to scale or how much effect, an extra 2 or 3% here and there or an extra 10% on the 3-piece bonus is going to have an impact. I can tell you that it will help. I just don't know how much. Now, this is a really nice backpack. It has some bleed resistance, which is a common status effect in the Dark Zone, but I would actually recommend something like Shock or Burn because those are more common CC effects when fighting other players, and they have a lot of utility because if you can prevent a burn, it can make the difference between whether or not you live and die in the Dark Zone especially. Moving on to my holster, again, very important to roll armor. There's not very much that you're going to roll here other than armor, maybe pistol damage for a dedicated pistol build. With the new pistol variant, the 93R, I'll have a build coming momentarily. Actually, I'll be doing that right after this one, talking about a infinite spam heal build using the ballistic shield, and you can tank as well. It's really interesting, but for the purposes of a striker build, you're going to run armor in the major attribute on your holster in that slot. You're going to have hopefully high 1200s across the board if you can. About 1250 in every single slot is what I consider to be upwards of a god roll, and over 1200 is going to be what you definitely want to shoot for. So I've re-rolled it here to achieve that, over 1200 in all 3 of the main stats. Moving on to my knee pads. These are decently rolled firearms knee pads. I would prefer them to be higher, but I had to re-roll for armor in the major attribute slot. Again, I'm not sure what they were intending to change, but as far as I can tell on the PTS, there's nothing that beats armor, and especially with this build, pound for pound, you're going to have to roll armor in the major attribute slot to keep yourself alive while you're face tanking. You are going to be doing a significant amount of face tanking, both against players and NPCs. Outside of that, for the minor attributes, you can have bleed resistance, disorient resistance, but I would prefer shock and burn, both if you can possibly get them. That's extremely helpful. Moving on to my mask, I have a striker's mask with a decent stamina roll. It has critical hit chance. That's very, very good to roll, especially with a shotgun. And you can swap it out for something like skill power. You can swap it out for something like health on kill. But critical hit chance actually has value now, and it's very difficult to achieve the crit cap in anything other than a build specifically dedicated towards that. So critical hit chance on a mask is actually going to drastically boost your DPS output, especially in PvP. And if you're face trading and you get that extra crit, it can actually mean the difference between killing the enemy or them killing you. So it's very important to roll this as on a major attribute on your mask. If you are running this striker build, it can be very, very helpful. For the minor attributes, I have burn resistance. That's exactly what I want there because I know that flame turrets are going to be a thing in the 1.5 Dark Zone. I don't know if they're going to consume the metagame, but they will absolutely be present. So burn resistance is going to be key in a lot of different regards. Moving on to my 2 high ends, I'm choosing to run the Savage Gloves with a decent firearms roll. Again, I would prefer over 1200 in every category if I could. but 11, 8, 9 is okay. Savage Gloves are still extremely powerful for the glove slot. Critical hit chances increased by 7% against targets out of cover. This has not changed, and targets still fight out of cover, especially in PvP. Not only do NPCs frequently leave cover to face trade with you, enemy players almost never enter cover. So 7% against targets out of cover coupled with your mask is an easy 10%. Down here in the major attribute slots, I don't have a god roll on this set of Savage Gloves. I would prefer critical hit damage, critical hit chance, and shotgun damage. The shotgun damage in the major attribute slot is still per pellet and will drastically boost the efficiency of your SASG. But health on kill, I would prefer critical hit chance. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of health on kill, especially when doing some PvE stuff. And also in PvP, if you can get, 4 or 8 or 16% even from rifle butting an enemy player, it does help a lot. But the most valuable thing is shotgun damage on these gloves, so that's the important thing to note here. Moving on to my chest piece. Now, Vigorous is what I would advise running here. However, Vigorous has received a downtune. It is no longer the case that you can equip Vigorous and then overheal your entire team with your booster shot. You can only be overhealed by a booster shot if you have the Vigorous chest piece on yourself, which means if your teammate does not wear the Vigorous chest piece, they cannot receive an overheal from your booster shot even though you have on the Vigorous chest piece. This drastically hurts the efficiency of Vigorous, and I don't believe that it's anywhere near the best in slot chest piece anymore. I do actually think that it's very, very important and the best in slot non-unique chest piece, but there is actually going to be a chest piece, a unique one called the Leray Barrett chest piece, I believe, and it will reduce incoming damage by 10%. That's all damage resilience by 10% increased while you have no skills active, while you have both your skills on cooldown essentially, which is very, very strong. And if I'm wrong about that bonus in any way, please correct me in the comments below. However, I was not able to get my hands on one. That is the one addition to this build which would be ideal, especially for PvP. If you do get lucky enough to get your hands on that chest piece, it's pretty much going to be better than every other chest piece in the game no matter what, depending on the build that you're running. Maybe a few fringe builds won't use that, but if you can get your hands on that, it's amazing, and I really wish I was able to, in the PTS, to show you and test builds. However, in the live game, I'll be grinding non-stop for that, and expect a lot of builds surrounding that chest piece especially to be emerging. I've rolled very high in the stamina category here on this operator vest with Vigorous. I have protection from elites and armor. Armor is the important part here. Protection from elites could be health on kill if you wanted to. It could be flat health, which is actually quite valuable now and would boost your toughness significantly. It could also be EDR, exotic damage resilience, for anyone interested. If you don't like being hit by flame turrets or anything like that, and you don't like seeker mines, etc., it will protect you from those. Minor attributes, having some ammo capacity is very important. You can get large chunks of it on both your backpack and your chest piece, so rolling it on at least one is going to be a quality of life thing that you're going to enjoy. And then for all of the different mods in my gear, I'm going to go over those now. I have stamina with armor. That is still the best in slot. You can have very high rolled stamina mods now at about 250 a pop, and you can have upwards of 250 armor a pop per stamina mod in 5 different slots. So I have rolled prototype stamina mods with armor in every single piece of gear that I have. I don't really see this changing either. There are some fringe builds, again, that we will be covering as well that use different mechanics, maybe the ballistic shield with electronics mods, or maybe signature ability resource gain or skill haste, all these different things. But right now, for any sort of DPS build, you're always going to run stamina or firearms mods with armor. That's the best in slot. So moving on to my actual weapon, I have an SASG as the primary gun that I'm going to be using in the footage and pretty much across the board. The most important talent to run with it, I believe, is Unforgiving. Now, the reason for this is that this is the second highest percentage weapon damage bonus that's easiest to actually proc in the game. And if you have 2 missing health segments, you have 25%. Now, this will be on top of everything else. You can get 100%, or realistically upwards of 50% with Striker very fast, in addition to possibly letting yourself reach the last health segment and then having an additional 25% from Unforgiving. And then the second talent, and also a very important one, is Responsive. So an additional 10% from Responsive due to the fact that you're always going to be face trading within 10 meters. And then on top of that, you have something like Booster Shot that's giving you an additional 15%. I would prefer Competent in my 3rd slot, but Vicious does not hurt. Vicious actually is a very good pairing with Unforgiving, because if Vicious is active, Unforgiving is not, and if Unforgiving is active, Vicious is not. So no matter what, you have one of these bonuses at all times. With the change to Vicious, of course, that is, which is while having more than 2 health segments, you have 10% increased critical hit chance. Factored on top of Savage Gloves, that's really valuable with a shotgun. You actually have decent crit hit chance and can be competitive while trading with enemy players at full health as well as at low health. I really like that synergistic combo of talents. Now, if that were competent, however, that'd be an additional 10% weapon damage, which would factor in very nicely and just boost the efficiency of the build. So I believe that the new God roll, for anyone wondering, I'm not going to do an entire dedicated video on this. The new God roll is Unforgiving, Responsive, Competent. That's what I firmly believe. I have a secondary of the MG5. Now, this is a blatantly overpowered gun that is too strong and needs to be either down-tuned or removed from the game. However, it is really, really strong. It's really good, and if you can get your hands on one, you're probably just going to run it on every single build because it has great damage to targets out of cover, really fantastic RPM, a really huge magazine size when you mod it correctly, and then really high base damage. So I'm not really going to talk about the talents. You can run whatever you want there. I have Unforgiving again because I view that to be one of the sleeper talents in 1.5, especially in 1.5 when everybody's face trading. That talent is going to allow you to win gunfights. It's going to be super valuable in almost every single encounter with enemy players especially. And even in PvE, it can be used to devastating effect. So that's it for the MG5. Moving on, I'm actually going to talk about my skills and then my talents. So here we go, and let's look at my abilities. Now I'm going to be running Booster Shot because I have the Vigorous Chest Piece. However, my skill power is very low. So I can only heal for about 52,000 HP per pop. And that's typically not going to allow me to get into my overheal bar because I have not prioritized the electronics. This just lends credence to the fact that the Leray Barrett chest piece is going to be super, super strong. If I were to be able to pop my pulse and my booster shot constantly, that would mean that I would be able to have 10% all damage resilience for pretty much the duration of every fight. So booster shot right now is kind of my placeholder until I get that chest piece, but for now it does serve the purposes that I need. And then for the pulse, I actually have Scrambler on. This is because I was in the Dark Zone. I will be using this in the gameplay footage, but anytime you're in a dedicated PvE scenario, you're going to have Tactical Scanner. Anything other than a dedicated only PvE scenario, anytime there's the possibility of running into players, aka the Dark Zone, you will run Scrambler, and you should not even be looking at Tactical Scanner. Now the reason for this is because let's look at the difference here. You have 13.3% critical hit chance on both of these, and then you have 17.7 critical hit damage versus 13.3 critical hit damage. That's about 4% critical hit damage, and you're losing the ability to mitigate enemy pulses. You cannot counter them. Well, you're opening yourself up by running Tactical Scanner to not only be pulsed and then have an additional baseline at least 10% critical strike chance and about 15% critical hit damage on yourself by enemy players, and at the cost of probably not being able to activate your own pulse because they're probably going to be running Scrambler. So just a shout out to everyone that's kind of caught on to this already. A lot of people have been telling me, you know, in the Dark Zone, okay, well, you need to switch over to Tactical Scanner because I've already got the Scrambler. That is incorrect. They are wrong. The Scrambler should be run by multiple players. No one should be running Tactical Scanner because it's essentially a dead pulse. At least the Scrambler can conceal you because everyone is concealing themselves from the enemy's pulses. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on that too much. That's kind of a dead subject. I'm going to move on. Talking about the talents, there's actually a very specific set that you're going to run. Tactical Advance is the first one that you can switch out, absolutely. You do not need to run this by any means. It's actually been nerfed. 2% per meter covered for 5 seconds now is not very good. So anytime you're in a group composition, you're going to switch that out for something like Triage or something like Combat Medic immediately. Outside of that, there are two very important talents, and that is On the Move and Critical Save. Both of these are very, very efficient. I don't actually know of any other talents that you're ever going to run instead of these two, because they, in tandem, can actually increase your survivability from, let's say, 400,000 toughness, damn near up to 1 million. There's a lot going on with these mitigation bonuses, and they are reflected in the meter now. So feel free to check your inventory at various stages during a fight, especially in PvE, to see like what you have procced at that time and how it's affecting your essential effective toughness rather than your baseline displayed meter toughness out of combat. Outside of that, I would say go for Strike Back. It's a very valuable talent. It just allows you to pop Booster Shot more often, and you are going to be achieving low health to proc Unforgiving on Q, so it's going to work very well in tandem with that. There's a lot of bonuses here. There are some other talents that are going to be very, very effective for PvE especially. Something like Precision, if you choose not to run a Pulse, is going to be great. Something like One is None, if you are confident in your ability to land headshots, both of those are going to be fantastic. And then again, as soon as you're in a group, you're going to put on Combat Medic for Tactical Advance, and then possibly swap Triage for Strike Back, because the equivalent amount of skill cooldown reduction is going to be much higher if you can coordinate with your team and get them to step into your heal. So that's going to do it for my overview of my character. I'm going to go through my character sheet really quickly just to show you some bonuses. Critical hit chance is actually at 19% for me pre-pulse. Critical hit damage and headshot damage are not the main draw of this build. Weapon percentage base damage is actually the main draw of the build. And then moving on to survivability, I actually have 52.66% mitigation. That's fairly high. It's not going to be the same sort of scenario in 1.3 especially, or even in 1.4, where everyone kind of achieves the same amount of mitigation. If you are building specifically DPS and you go armor on everything, this is about the ballpark that you'll achieve with standard average rolls. If you get some, extremely high rolls across the board, you may achieve upwards of 55, 57%, but typical scenarios are going to see enemy agents with about 53%, you're going to be about 53%, and that's on a dedicated armor-built PvP build that has high firearms and is DPS-oriented. There are some fringe builds, which again I'll be covering soon, that have less armor mitigation or more armor mitigation, depending on what their role is supposed to be, utilizing high-end talents or other niche roles, etc. But for the purposes of this, it's going to be a DPS one with about 52.66. Moving on, there's not much else here, but anyone that wants to pause it definitely can and take a look. I'm going to kick it over to some gameplay of me on a challenge mode Lexington run and talk about how much damage it does, how you're going to be stacking, and why I think that Striker is going to be competitive in the metagame and extremely efficient in 1.5. Alright, so I'm going to be doing a challenge mode Lexington, or a portion of it, and talking about the high base damage, the mechanics of the build, etc. Now, I don't have any PvP footage for you guys today, but I do have a lot of it in the live stream. Now, check out the full Twitch live streams playlist on our channel, and you'll be able to see this build as well as others fully showcased in the Dark Zone with both squad and solo gameplay. I just feel like it seems a little bit more difficult for me when I'm not live streaming, when I'm, in the middle of the night Eastern time trying to get footage for builds. It becomes a little bit more difficult. There is footage, it does exist, but right now I'm going to be showing on NPCs what the build can do and how fast it can stack, because that's the most important thing. If you can stack to about 30% damage in just a couple of shots, or higher, maybe up to about 60 over the course of a couple seconds, you're going to be able to shred enemy players, especially with the implementation of the 10% enemy armor damage on the 3-piece bonus of Striker into PvP as well, because it will now affect enemy agents. This build is very, very strong. As you can see here, there was a lot of, I guess concern around the level 34 NPCs and them being too bullet spongy perhaps, and a lot of people wrongfully assumed that we were entering patch 1.3 2.0, which is not the case. As you can see, level 34 is actually dropped very, very quickly, especially to a build like this. This is not even a dedicated PvE build. If I were to stack more damage to elites and more enemy armor damage, I'd be able to kill them even faster. But they're really not a problem, and neither are enemy agents. Now, another mechanic that I have to talk about, and I don't actually have video footage of it, but it has been implemented and confirmed in the state of the game. Shotguns now have a marginal stagger effect in PvP. Now, what that means is that they'll make the enemy flinch. They will not make the enemy stagger across the map like they used to, like the explosive bullets did. This is not the same stagger effect. But what they will do is if both players are aiming down sights at each other and a shotgunner lands a shot and it procs the quote-unquote stagger effect, they will flinch. That means their reticle will jump away from the target and they'll have to re-aim down sights again at the target or at least remove their sights from off target back on target to deal damage again and land shots. I think that that's a really cool mechanic. That brings some kind of bonus. It's very subtle, it's very small, but it brings some kind of bonus to shotguns in a PvP sense on their rolled talent in terms of stagger that is valuable but not game breaking. So I really like that, which means again when you're aiming down sights and base trading with players, which is where this build excels due to its high toughness and its very quick stacking of Striker and its very high percentage weapon damage bonuses. If you get to one health segment and then also stack 25% Striker, which is very easy to do, you're actually going to have 50% increased damage on top of a shotgun that has nearly 100,000 base damage to begin with. The SASG is very strong. There's a lot of potential with the build. So I'm actually going to wrap it up there. I'm on track to complete this solo challenge mode Lexington in about 12 minutes, give or take. It's a very, very effective build. I would urge everyone to try it out and to check out our other build videos and let us know what you think, or send in footage of you using the builds in different areas, different levels of efficiency, etc. So check out our communities as well. They're growing at a really great pace. We have a lot of really awesome events like the DZ911. If you're interested in what that is, check out our Facebook and our Discord communities below. There's going to be a lot of information about it. As always, guys, I appreciate the viewership. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a nice day.